The dust of redemption clings to everything, a fine red powder that cakes in the throat and settles in the soul. For Alara, sitting on a splintered bench outside the land office, it feels like the grit of her own broken dreams. Her belly is a gentle, hopeful swell beneath the worn calico of her dress, a secret she can no longer hide, and a truth the town has already condemned. She is the bride who arrived without a groom, the woman whose promised life vanished the moment she stepped off the stagecoach a month ago, letter in hand from a man who was no longer there. She has one biscuit left, wrapped in a piece of wax paper. It is hard and dry, saved from the meager breakfast offered at the boarding house where she works for her keep. It's meant to be her supper. As the sun bleeds across the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows from the town's false front buildings, a man walks into the edge of her vision. He's a drifter, plain as day. His clothes are dusty but not ragged, his boots worn but solid. He doesn't carry the desperate, hungry look of most men on the road. Instead, his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, are watchful, missing nothing. He stops not far from her, leaning against a hitching post, his gaze fixed on the fading light over the distant bluffs. He doesn't ask for anything, doesn't even look her way, but she feels his stillness, a profound loneliness that mirrors her own. Without a second thought, she breaks the biscuit in two. The snap is loud in the evening quiet. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. Before this story unfolds, tell us, have you ever stood up for someone unfairly judged? If you believe in looking beyond the surface, hit like and subscribe. The drifter turns his head, his expression unreadable. Alara holds out the larger half. Her hand trembles slightly. It is a foolish, reckless gesture. This half biscuit is the only thing standing between her and a hollow stomach tonight. But the silence stretching between them is more gnawing than any hunger she has ever known. He is a stranger, a ghost on the edge of a town that has already marked her as an outcast. In his quiet solitude, she sees a reflection of herself. And with 3 words, a quiet offering in the fading light. You look weary. Her life, and his, were irrevocably changed. He had taken the biscuit. For a long moment, the stranger had simply looked at the offering in her palm, his stormy eyes assessing not the food, but her. She'd expected refusal, or perhaps a snatch and run, the kind of desperate act she'd seen from other men whose luck had run dry. Instead, he had reached out with a steady, calloused hand and taken the piece from her gently, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. The touch was surprisingly warm against the evening chill. Much obliged, he'd said. His voice was deeper than she expected, a low rumble that seemed to come from his chest. He didn't devour it. He ate it slowly, deliberately, as if giving the stale bread a respect it didn't deserve. They sat in a shared silence as the last vestiges of daylight surrendered to a purple twilight pricked with the first stars. He never asked her name, nor she his. He didn't ask why a woman, visibly with child, was sitting alone on a public bench as respectable folk closed their shutters for the night. The questions hung in the air, unspoken and therefore, somehow, kinder. When he finished, he brushed the crumbs from his hands, stood, and gave her a short, formal nod. A kindness like that is worth more than gold, ma'am. Then he was gone, melting into the deepening shadows of the alley beside the mercantile, leaving Alara with the smaller half of the biscuit and a strange sense of peace. That peace was short-lived. The next morning, the town of Redemption remembered who she was. Mrs. Gable, the preacher's wife and the town's self-appointed moral compass, saw her sweeping the porch of the boarding house. Her lips pursed into a thin, white line of disapproval. "Still here, are we, Miss Thorne?" The "miss" was a deliberate barb, a reminder of the wedding dress packed away in her trunk and the groom who had never materialized. Alara's fiancé, Thomas, had sent glowing letters about redemption, about the small ranch he was building, the life they would have. He'd neglected to mention the cholera that swept through these parts in the spring, or that his name was now carved on a simple wooden cross in the town's windswept cemetery. She had arrived an intended bride and become a charity case within the hour. The town's pity had curdled into suspicion as the weeks passed, and the gentle curve of her stomach became an undeniable fact. They did the math in their hushed whispers over fence posts and in the pews on Sunday. The baby was coming too soon. She was not just a grieving fiancée, She was a fallen woman. "Yes, Mrs. Gable. I have work here," Alara replied, keeping her eyes on the dust motes dancing in the morning sun. Her cheeks burned with a shame that wasn't hers to carry, but had been placed upon her shoulders all the same. "For now," the woman sniffed, pulling her shawl tighter as if to ward off Alara's very presence. "A town like ours has standards. We cannot be seen to condone circumstances such as yours." The threat was clear. Her position at the boarding house, cleaning rooms and washing linens for a cot in the attic and 2 meals a day, was tenuous. It depended entirely on the grudging tolerance of its owner, a man who feared Mrs. Gable's gossip more than he feared God. Every day was a trial. The women who clutched their Bibles on Sunday averted their eyes. The men either ignored her or looked at her with a leering pity that was somehow worse. She was utterly alone, a ship becalmed in a hostile sea. The memory of the drifter was a strange comfort. He, at least, had looked at her and seen a person, not a scandal. He'd seen a woman offering a piece of bread, and he had accepted it with dignity. It was the most respect she had been shown in a month. Days bled into weeks. Alara learned to make herself small, to move through the town like a phantom. She did her work diligently, her hands raw from lye soap and scalding water. She spoke only when spoken to. She felt the life inside her quicken, a flutter that was both a terror and a comfort. This child was all she had left of Thomas, the only piece of that bright, hopeful future she'd traveled 1,000 miles to claim. For the baby's sake, she endured. She saved every spare penny from the pittance she earned mending clothes for miners, hiding the coins in a loose floorboard in her attic room. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A start for what? She didn't know. Just a way. One afternoon, as she was buying thread at the mercantile, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Mr. Henderson, the owner of the boarding house, was talking to the sheriff. "I don't know how much longer I can keep her on, Sheriff," he said, his voice a low, worried murmur. "My wife is beside herself. Says it's a bad influence. Mrs. Gable is stirring up the church ladies again. She's committed no crime, Henry," the sheriff replied, his tone weary. "That don't matter, and you know it. This is a decent town. A pregnant, unmarried girl, it ain't right. I'll have to let her go by the end of the month." The thread slipped from Alara's numb fingers and rolled across the dusty floorboards. The end of the month. 2 weeks. She would have nowhere to go. Winter was approaching, its chill already sharpening the evening air. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the careful walls she had built around her heart. She paid for her thread, her hands shaking, and fled the store, the whispers of the townspeople following her like carrion crows. She didn't stop until she reached the bench where she had met the drifter, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The sun was setting again, in the same mercilessly beautiful blaze of orange and red. But this time, there was no biscuit to share. There was nothing left at all. She sat there for hours, long after the town had gone quiet. The cold seeped into her bones. She thought of her unborn child, a life so innocent and vulnerable, and a fierce, protective anger rose up in her, drowning the fear. She would not be cast out. She would not let her child be born in a ditch. Thomas had bought a plot of land. The deed was in her trunk, his name on it, legally hers now as his sole heir, a fact the town lawyer had begrudgingly confirmed. It was considered worthless, a scrubby, windswept hill overlooking the town, with no water and rocky soil. But it was hers. The next morning, Alara walked out of the boarding house with her trunk, her back straight. She didn't say goodbye. She walked through the town, ignoring the stunned and scornful looks, and headed for the hill. Using the last of her savings, she paid 2 freight workers $1 to haul her trunk up the rise. They left her there with pitying looks, alone on a patch of dirt with nothing but a trunk, a threadbare blanket, and a will of iron. She had a few days of food, a water skin, and the tools Thomas had left in the trunk, a hammer, an axe, and a small saw. She would build a shelter. She had to. It was a desperate, impossible plan, but it was a plan born of her own strength, and for the first time since arriving in Redemption, she felt a flicker of control over her own fate. She would survive on this barren hill, a testament to the town's cruelty and her own resilience. She would build a life from the rocks and dust they had discarded. The work was brutal. Her hands, already calloused, blistered and bled. She cleared scrub brush and used the rocks to build a low, crude wall for a windbreak. She hacked at the stubborn, gnarled junipers, trying to fashion some kind of lean-to against the largest of the rock outcroppings. It was a pitiful shelter, barely enough to keep out the worst of the wind, but it was hers. Every evening, she would sit by a small, smoky fire and eat her meager rations, watching the lights of redemption flicker on below. The town looked so peaceful from her lonely perch, a stark contrast to the cold judgment she knew it held. One evening, a week into her self-imposed exile, a rider appeared at the base of her hill. It was the sheriff. He dismounted and walked slowly up the incline, his face etched with concern. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat, "you can't stay up here. The first snow will be here soon. You'll freeze." "I have nowhere else to go, Sheriff," Alara said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The town made that clear. He had the grace to look ashamed. Henry Henderson had no right, but folks are stubborn in their ways. "Mrs. Gable has been vocal," he sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "There's an old line shack a few miles west of here. It ain't much, but the roof is sound. I could take you there. At least you'd be out of the weather." It was an act of kindness, a small one, but it felt monumental. Alara looked at her pathetic shelter, at the blisters on her hands, and felt tears well in her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The sheriff helped her pack her few belongings, and as they rode away from the barren hill, she didn't look back. The line shack was small, just one room with a stone fireplace and a rickety cot, but it felt like a palace. It was shelter. It was a chance. The next few months were a quiet routine of survival. The sheriff brought her supplies once a week: flour, salt pork, beans, leaving them on the porch without a word, a silent pact of charity between them. She spent her days mending the shack, gathering firewood, and sewing baby clothes from the fabric of her old dresses. The solitude was profound. Some days, the silence was a heavy blanket, suffocating her with loneliness. On other days, it was a balm, a respite from the judging eyes of redemption. She often thought of the drifter. She wondered where he had gone, what roads he traveled. The memory of his quiet dignity was a small, warm coal she kept glowing in the cold furnace of her heart. He had seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one else had. A single act of shared humanity on a dusty evening. It had become a talisman, a reminder that goodness existed in the world, even if it was just passing through. As her time grew near, a cold fear began to creep back in. She was alone. The sheriff was her only link to the world, but he couldn't be here every moment. What if the baby came during a snowstorm? What if something went wrong? She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the steady, rhythmic kick of the life inside her. They had come this far together. They would see it through. One crisp autumn afternoon, the sound of wagon wheels and hammering echoed from the direction of town. It was distant, but distinct. For days the sound continued, a persistent, industrious noise that piqued her curiosity. It seemed to be coming from her hill, the one she had abandoned. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just a rancher putting up a fence, but the scale of the noise suggested something more. Finally, her curiosity won. One clear, cold morning, she wrapped herself in her thickest shawl and walked the few miles back towards redemption, her steps slow and careful. As she crested the last rise, she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Her hill was transformed. It was crawling with men, dozens of them. Wagons loaded with timber and cut stone clogged the makeshift road leading to the summit. And there, on the very spot where she had built her miserable lean-to, the foundation of a house was being laid. Not a cabin, not a shack, but a grand structure, its stone footprint larger than any two buildings in Redemption combined. Surveyors with tripods directed workers, and the rhythmic clang of hammers on steel rang through the clear air. She stood, hidden by a copse of aspens, utterly bewildered. Who would build such a place on this worthless land? And why? As she watched, a man on a fine black horse rode to the summit, dismounting with an easy grace. He conferred with a man holding blueprints, his posture one of effortless command. He turned, and the sunlight caught his face. Alara's heart stopped. The clothes were different, a tailored wool coat, fine leather boots, but the set of his shoulders, the way he stood, and the profile of his face were unmistakable. It was the drifter. He seemed to feel her gaze, his head lifting, his stormy eyes scanning the landscape. For a breathtaking moment, their eyes met across the distance. There was no surprise in his expression, only a calm, steady recognition. He said something to the foreman, then swung himself back onto his horse and began riding not towards the town, but directly towards her. Panic and confusion warred within her. She wanted to run, to hide, but her feet were rooted to the spot. He rode at a gentle pace, closing the distance until he reined in his horse just a few feet away, looking down at her. He was clean-shaven now, his dark hair neatly cut. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Ma'am," he said, and the deep, rumbling voice was the same one that had thanked her for a piece of stale bread. He swung down from the saddle. "I was hoping I might find you." Who are you?" she stammered, her mind struggling to reconcile the man before her with the dusty traveler from her memory. A faint, wry smile touched his lips. "My name is Silas Croft, and I came back to repay a debt." "A debt?" she asked, bewildered. "I don't understand." "You shared the last of your food with a stranger," he said, his gaze serious. "You showed kindness when you had every reason to be bitter. That is a debt of the highest order." He gestured back towards the bustling construction site on the hill. "I'm a man who believes in sound investments, and I have never seen a better investment than in a person of your character." The sheer absurdity of it all struck her. The drifter, the house, the debt. But that was just a biscuit. "To you, maybe," Silas said softly. "To me, it was a sign. I had been traveling for months, disillusioned with the world, with the greed and selfishness I found everywhere. I had forgotten what simple, unadorned goodness looked like. You reminded me." He took a step closer. "I learned what happened after I left. How this town treated you. How you fought to survive on your own. I bought this land, Miss Thorne. All of it." He gestured to the hill and the valley beyond. "And I am building that house for you." Alara could only stare, speechless. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across her face, and she felt a dizzying sense of unreality. A mansion? For her? Because of a biscuit? "Why?" she finally whispered, the word barely audible. "Because a queen deserves a castle," he said simply. "And you, Miss Thorne, have the heart of a queen." He saw the suspicion and fear still warring in her eyes. "There are no strings attached. It is a gift, a home for you and your child, where you will be safe and no one will ever dare to judge you again." That afternoon, he rode with her back to the line shack. He didn't press her, didn't pry into her past. He simply told her about himself. He explained, from a wealthy family back east. A baron, though he disliked the title. He had grown tired of the gilded cage of his life, the false smiles and grasping hands, and had set out to see the real country, to find something authentic. He'd found it on a dusty bench in Redemption. He left her at the door of the shack, promising to send a wagon for her things the next day, to install her in the boarding house, in its finest room, which he had already paid for, until the house was ready. As he rode away, Alara leaned against the rough-hewn doorframe, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The world had turned upside down. The town of Redemption was apoplectic. The news spread like wildfire. The mysterious, wealthy stranger building the fortress on the hill was doing it for the fallen woman. For Alara Thorne. Mrs. Gable nearly choked on her tea. The speculation was rampant, scandalous. Henry Henderson, the boarding house owner, was suddenly obsequious, bowing and scraping as he showed Alara to the very room she used to scrub on her hands and knees. The women who had snubbed her now offered timid, uncertain smiles. Silas Croft ignored them all. His focus was on the house and on Alara. He treated her with a profound and unwavering respect that baffled the town. He ate his meals with her in the boarding house dining room, his presence a silent rebuke to the gossips. He would walk with her in the evenings, telling her about the plans for the house. A nursery with windows that caught the morning sun, a library filled with books, a kitchen with the finest stove money could buy. One evening, standing on the hill as the framing of the second story reached for the sky, Mrs. Gable, emboldened by a phalanx of church ladies, confronted them. "Mr. Croft," she called out, her voice shrill. "The good people of this town are wondering about your intentions, to lavish such extravagance on this woman of questionable morals. It sets a terrible example." Silas turned slowly, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to her agitation. He looked not at her, but at Alara, his expression softening. Then he faced Mrs. Gable, and his stormy eyes were suddenly chipped from ice. "My intentions," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air, "are to honor the finest person I have ever had the privilege of meeting. This woman," he said, taking Alara's hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles, "showed more Christian charity in a single moment, with nothing to her name, than you and your good people have shown in a lifetime of Sundays." He gestured to the half-built mansion. "This house is not an extravagance. It is a monument. It is a testament to the fact that true worth is not measured by wealth or status, or by the cruel whispers of small-minded people. It is measured by character, by kindness, and by that measure, Miss Thorne is the richest person in this entire territory." He squeezed Alara's hand. "This house is her vindication, and I will consider it a personal insult if any person in this town ever speaks a word against her again." A stunned silence fell over the women. Mrs. Gable's face was a mottled red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Without another word, they turned and scurried back down the hill, thoroughly routed. In that moment, standing beside him with his hand holding hers, Alara felt the last of her shame fall away, turning to dust and blowing away on the wind. He had not just given her a home, he had given her back her dignity. He had stood before her enemies and declared her worthy. The house was finished just as the first snows began to fall. It was beautiful, a marvel of stone and timber with glass windows that glittered in the sun. On the day she moved in, Silas was there to carry her trunk over the threshold. The inside was warm, filled with sturdy, handsome furniture, and the nursery was just as he'd described, flooded with pale, gentle light. That evening, they stood together on the wide veranda, looking down at the twinkling lights of redemption. The town that had cast her out now lay at her feet. Snowflakes began to drift down, soft and silent, blanketing the world in a pristine white. Her child, a son, had been born a week prior in the comfort and safety of the town doctor's office, paid for by Silas. He was asleep in the new cradle upstairs. "It's a home," Alara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Silas stood beside her, not touching, but his presence was a solid, reassuring warmth in the cold night. "It always was," he said quietly. "It just needed to be built." He looked at her then, his gaze gentle and full of an emotion she was just beginning to understand. It wasn't pity or charity. It was something deeper, something quieter. It was respect. It was admiration. And woven through it all, she saw the unmistakable gleam of affection. In his eyes, she was not the abandoned bride or the fallen woman. She was the woman who had shared her last biscuit. She was the queen in her castle, a fortress built not just of stone, but of an unexpected and profound kindness. He made a compassionate choice that changed their lives. The mansion on the hill stands as a testament, not to wealth, but to the enduring power of a single, selfless act. Alara and her son have found their sanctuary, and in the quiet respect of Silas Croft, she has found a partnership more valuable than any fortune. They have built more than a house. They have started to build a home, founded on the simple truth that true value lies in the goodness of the human heart. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. Her true worth was finally seen. What does true value in a person mean to you? Tell us below.